me. No, I'm really grateful that you were able to be with us today. I don't have to tell the staff here that Pastor Larry is a pretty spectacular guy, enduring through the mud fest that you speak about. I know I've worked a few summer camps in my youth that were muddy, but those are the most memorable as well. You think of your fearless leader here who did 3 weeks of camp over there in BC before coming. And wasn't it last winter you were in Africa for camp? Yeah? Yeah, what was that, 3 or 4 weeks in Africa? Yeah, that's a real challenge, just to take music and ministry there. I've just looked around. I haven't worked there, but spent a few days visiting and trying to encourage some pastors. And it's not an easy gig, as they say. It just doesn't come easy. But your pastor is not just God's man of faith and power. This last week, I know we had jammed up toilets, and Arnold Lott was gracious enough on a moment's notice to drive out a 100-pound snake, and Larry fixed the plumbing out there. So that's versatility for you, and a hard act to follow. Can you sing? Can you preach? Can you plumb? This man has it all in one. I do very much enjoy Larry's music, and one of the songs he sang in the past was written by a biker, simply titled Ride Against the Wind, or Sometimes You Got to Ride Against the Wind. Larry has a real heart for biker ministry. In fact, I have a picture. I don't know if you can go forward on my slides there, Larry. Okay, there's Pastor Larry in his youth. Hair was a little more, in evidence back then, and he was very proud of his Harley there. But no, actually, this is Pastor Z. This is not Pastor L. This is Pastor Z. Pastor Z is the rebel with a cause. Okay, but it was a Calgary biker who wrote that song, "Ride Against the Wind." Had nothing to do with Pete Seeger and the Silver Bullet Band or any of those guys. But I found that a very inspiring song. And the last couple of years when Larry has sung it, it has really spoken to me. The whole idea that as a biker, he could relate to the fact that when he gets on his bike, he begins to move. There are going to be challenges, and especially you're going to have gnats coming at you, and you need goggles. You're going to get bugs in your teeth. You're going to be riding against the wind. In fact, I suppose you could say that simply to be on a bike and moving, you can't live without a breeze. That's the very start of things. And if you're going to move at any speed at all, you're going to have a headwind. And that particular allegory came to light in that song. And every time I think of it, it reminds me of the very nature of life. Life brings challenge. You know, Job, when he was philosophizing with his comforters, who weren't much joy to him anyway, he was addressing the problem, and he said this in Job 5 and verse 6. He says, "For hardship does not spring from the soil, nor does trouble sprout from the ground." Pretty obvious. Yet, or which means but, man is born to trouble as surely as sparks fly upwards. It just is that way. If you're going to live, you're going to experience stress. And if you're going to live with any type of enthusiasm or have any direction, you're going to have some headwind. You're going to have some stress. The very nature of life is stressful. Now, the first thing that occurs to us is, if God is so nice and God is so good, why does He let that happen? Why does it have to happen to me? And you go back all the way to the beginning. If God were to relieve you of all stress, He would have to interfere with my life. You see, we all came with free will. We all came with the power to make choices. And unfortunately, sometimes my choices infringe upon your wishes, and your choices infringe upon my wishes. And so, the old joke, if I preach overtime, you're going to grumble. You're going to grumble because lunch is waiting, and around the circle we'll go. But we go all the way back to the beginning when man had a certain choice, and we've been making that choice for ourselves ever since. Do we partake of the tree of life? Do we listen to him who is the way, the truth, and the life? Or do we participate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? And if you don't mind having your free will suspended, well, then I could have a much simpler life. On the other hand, if I mind having my free will suspended, so here it is, God, it's not exactly that we tie his hands, but we demand the freedom to live as we live. Back when I was very, very young, and in fact, before I graduated from college, so back when I was 19 or 20, there was a popular song that went something like, "Put your hand in the hand from the man who stilled the waters." You remember that? Oh, you're nodding. You have just betrayed your age, young lady. Okay. That, you know who recorded that? It was recorded by a Canadian group from Toronto called Ocean. Ocean. They had two hits. Number one was "Put Your Hand in the Hand of the Man Who Stilled the Water." Okay? And the other hit was called "One More Chance." One more chance. Don't deny your people just one more chance. Give tomorrow's children one more chance. All they want is freedom. Just one more chance to prove that they can make a good living with just one more chance. In other words, give us a break. Let us have our freedom. And it went on. In fact, some of the words were pretty gross. I don't need the answer. It's written everywhere. Seems the man upstairs, well, he don't really care. If you believe the stories I'll tell you, friend, that's fine. But you don't get my hallelujah until I see a sign. The point being that I am living my freedoms, I'm making my choices, I'm doing my thing, but you're to blame. Well, okay, how does that really work out? Ocean, good Canadian group from Toronto. The words were penned by a guy by the name of Roger Cook. And the reason I relate to Roger Cook is he grew up in the fine city of Bristol, England, in the suburb of Fish Ponds, where I grew up. Roger Cook. I didn't know that until I Googled his name here recently. Whoa, this guy is like from around the corner from where I lived. This is an Englishman. I expect better. Roger Cook, actually, he was fairly popular in the late 60s, early 70s, and then he became a competent songwriter, moved to Nashville. He's still this day the only Englishman in the Nashville Songwriters Hall of Fame, something to aspire to. But the point is, here, my freedoms, my free will that I feel entitled to and I want from God also gives me the freedom to make choices that affect you, and your choices affect mine. And the very nature of life is simply this. There's always going to be a breeze in your face, but if you get on the bike and you try to move anywhere, you will often face a headwind. You can't avoid it. Life is stress, as I think Tom Brady said. This is life. This isn't a piece of cake. There are real challenges that came with a real life. Last weekend I did a wedding, and the wedding was for a lady whose husband I had buried some years ago. He had taken his own life, tragically, and it was a very difficult funeral to conduct. There are a lot of people there. Some of you are probably there. And here I am standing with a small, intimate group of family, and they're standing in a gazebo in Stony Plain. Very nice setting, by the way. And now, after I've asked the formal questions, comes the opportunity. You want to say a few words to each other. So they pull out their 3x5 cards, and the words were rather stunning, in as much as the lady said, "I am so glad that I have found a soulmate in you. We have been through some things together. We have been through a bankruptcy. We have been through loss. We have been through and going through a debilitating illness. But through all of this, you are my soulmate, and I am so grateful that God has brought you into my life." Whoa, wait a second, I didn't expect that. You know, weddings are happy times. Weddings, you know, and I given thanks for the fact that God's love in each of them had brought them together, and we were going to celebrate this wedding. And here, an acknowledgement that we have known a great deal of headwind. And of course, I'm there, and I am having an opportunity to interact with her two children, the two children who lost their father some years ago. I find myself, the son is a spitting image of his dad, and I go all the way back to a ski trip, you know, in the early 80s when I was the sort of room monitor, and here I had 4 or 5 teenage boys. You know that can be a challenge. And his dad is motor mouthing till about midnight. Are you going to go to sleep, Fred? No, I'm not going to go to sleep because I'm thinking this or that or the other thing, and I'm excited about tomorrow. Well, go to sleep. I'm an old man already. Just give me a break, you know, back and forth. So it was nice. Here his son is older than Dad was back then by 5 or 6 years, and an accomplished young man. But it was nice to be able to tell some stories on his dad, to talk to the daughter and talk about some of those things. But here in the midst of rejoicing, I'm reminded, hey, these are two people. They are in later, well, midlife, we call it. Yeah, you know, you're happy, you're looking great today, but there are this challenge and that challenge, this health challenge, and you're going back to reestablish a different career because the last one has gone pear-shaped, and a number of things like that. Made the contact. In fact, they live in Courtenay, and had met up with my daughter at the airport, and remember when we were young people and in the youth group and all sorts of things, and we want to get married. We like to get married in Edmonton. Well, my dad's still there. Contact him. You know, all those things that go wrong. But here the reminder is, in the midst of joy and celebration, yeah, we're going to pull together and we're going to go through these headwinds. It was an interesting exchange because in 1 Corinthians 10, Paul talks about the challenges of life. And in this case, he says, look, do not grumble. You know, and of course he appeals back, since he's writing to at least a partly Jewish audience in this congregation, and he reminds them of their heritage. They were the descendants of a people who were characterized as stiff-necked and grumbling. Don't grumble. Some of them did. They were killed by the destroying angel. He doesn't mean by that, you know, congregation, God's going to get you and he's going to send a destroying angel among you, but he is referring back to the fact that this is the heritage and the final outcome of grumbling all the time. For them was death. These things happened to them as examples, were written down as warnings for us, on whom the culmination of the ages has come. So, smarten up. If you think that you are right in standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. He goes on to make a point here. No temptation has overcome you except what is common to mankind. It's a big mistake that I make, you make perhaps sometimes, in the midst of headwind, to believe simply, nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Nobody knows the pain that I know. Nobody listens to me. You know, one of the songs I learned, I had to take voice classes once. You may ask why, you sound so good. But anyway, I actually tried to learn to sing once, Larry. And it was the instructor was a cantor at St. Paul's Cathedral in London, and he was on the faculty of the college. But I had to learn a Southern Gospel song, and it went, nobody knows the trouble I've seen, Lord. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Now that was penned by a man in slavery, living under the whip with no freedom at all. So it's very inappropriate for me to sing that song in the midst of blessings and freedoms and opportunities. And all I can say about my problems is they're very much first world problems. They don't begin to compare to somebody who's living under the whip, who maybe would have been entitled to say, nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Nobody knows but Jesus. At least he acknowledged that. No temptation has overcome you except what is common to mankind. If I survey this audience right now, you know what it is to be widowed. You know what it is to be divorced. You know what it is to have children that push back, or grandchildren that don't do as you would dream they would do. You know what it is to have financial hardship, to struggle to make ends meet. You know what it is to make a relationship work. These things we have in common. So any time that we degenerate to self-pity, well, it's a mistake. God is faithful. He will not let you be pushed beyond what you can bear, he is saying. And when you are pushed, he will also provide a way out so that you can endure it. When you take a broader view, there's a meme that went around here a while ago, and I'll give you this one for free. Take a look at this. Everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. Be kind always. Everybody, in some way, is facing what you're facing. It's just that you don't know it. I can't see right now into your mind and in your heart and know what's afflicted you. Some things I can share with you, like what my friend Ray is going through right now with his wife, awaiting heart surgery. Some of those things we can agonize over together, but a lot of times we don't know. This was the same meme in this particular case with a different picture on. Everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. Be kind always. You recognize the guy? He entertained us. He was an amazing actor. He was a wit. He was a fast wit. He was smart. He was intelligent. He was deeply flawed in many ways. But you know, he brought us so much joy to so many people. And nobody would have looked at him and said, oh, I guess Parkinson's disease. And nobody would have understood the depth of the depression and discouragement he felt when he did what he did. So what am I saying? There will always be a breeze. That's the nature of life. There will always be a headwind if you try at all to move forward. If you get on the bike, rev it up, and start to move through life, you are going to face a headwind. But life calls for endurance, just as that young couple, that middle-aged couple, exchanging vows last weekend. You are worth enduring with. You are worth enduring for. I affirm my commitment in this relationship. And I acknowledge that there are trials and difficulties and problems, but the glass is half full and getting fuller. I acknowledge that. We have to dig down sometimes, but it calls for endurance. Paul says, don't be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatsoever a man sows, that shall he also reap. Now, you can read that in particular ways, in a cautionary way. We can also be reminded this is a truism, that he that sows to his flesh shall of the flesh reap corruption, because flesh dies. It grows old, it sags, and it wilts, and it dies. But he that sows to the Spirit shall of the Spirit reap life everlasting. No, that's what we're aiming for. That's what we're hoping for. That's what we've set our hearts on. And let us not be weary in well-doing. Let us understand this does call for endurance. For in due season we shall reap, unless we give up. And that's always an option. You have the free will. You always have an opportunity to give up, if you so choose. But we are called upon not to do that, to not faint. You know, I was asked about last weekend by somebody who was heard some bad news about some friends, and then a couple of other friends were going through a separation or divorce, and he just asked me bluntly, how do you cope when you listen to some of the things I had shared in church life and asked prayers and so forth? He said, how do you cope? And I thought for half a second, well, I guess I do what everybody else does, which is we do share. It's important. The old expression, a burden shared is a burden halved. So we reach out to others. That's in healthy families, that's what we do. We live in a rather unhealthy age, and sometimes people have to literally go and pay somebody to listen to them, to download their frustrations and their difficulties and their stresses. Sometimes it's a very healthy thing when you're, experiencing frustrations and tension, especially communication skills, and then you go and ask a professional, teach us how to relate to each other, to talk to each other, and that's a very healthy, that's a very good thing. Sometimes we just don't have anybody to talk to. I'm blessed. I have some people I can talk to. I'm married to a short, dynamic little blonde person who I won't name, and I can talk sometimes. I don't talk about, come home and dump everything, and some things are confidential, of course, but most of the time when I am up against frustrations, difficulties, I have somebody I can share with, and that is a healthy thing. On the other hand, ultimately, where do you sort of find strength? Peter explains it this way. He says, humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand, God's mighty hand. And the first word in that counsel to all of us is humble. Humble yourselves. There's a mistake that I can make, which is maybe I can solve something here. I'm a man. I fix things. Isn't that what we do with duct tape? Isn't that what men try to do? They try to fix things. Well, actually, I'm not here sitting by your hospital bed because I can fix anything. I do hope by sharing certain things that burden can be lightened, but I can't fix anything, and humility is the start. I can't solve anything. Humility is the start. Humble yourself, therefore, under God's powerful hand, because that's where we start, understanding that God is powerful, that He is strong, that He is going to, it says, lift us up in due time. Now, then he adds cast, which is sort of an action that you have to take. You have to take some of these things and you have to hand them over. Your anxiety on Him, He cares for you. Oh, okay. So humility helps. Being just willing to share and to comfort is constructive. And then actively taking those things and saying, look, I can't possess these things. I can't fix these things. I am powerless. And to hand them over. And the warning that he adds to this is be alert and of sober mind. You think this through. Why? Pastor Larry mentioned the enemy. An enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for somebody to devour. Now, that's an interesting observation that the enemy, and he referred to some very traumatic experiences at camp a few weeks ago. The enemy is likened to a roaring lion. Now, the truth about lions is if they're ever stalking a prey, they certainly don't warn the prey that they're coming. They don't growl. They don't make any noise at all. They are sneaky. They stalk quietly. And then when they pounce, you feel the teeth. Well, I don't say that personally. I am not an elk or an antelope or anything like that. But I am saying that that's what happens to you. However, when you hear an animal roaring, okay, it's probably at night because he's frustrated and can't see anything. And he's roaring just to create distraction and confusion and stir things up in the jungle. That's why he makes a noise. If he had anything in his eyesight, he wouldn't make any noise. And so you have to realize that the noise and the distractions of life are not actually where you should put your focus. I remember years ago, a friend of mine in Regina by the name of Tom Jameson, a very, very capable individual. It was a great pleasure last year. I was invited back to perform his daughter's wedding. But Tom is a very structured, organized individual, very neat, very tidy. And he married Mel, and Mel is a free artistic spirit. As he described, the thing that really freaks him out is not A, B, or C. It's that cup in the sink. What's it doing there? It's that fork in the sink. One time he walked in the kitchen, and Mel was doing something with the kids. Well, what was she doing? Well, she turned on the popcorn maker and was creating a shower of popcorn. And he walked in, and here the kids are playing under the popcorn with Mom. And he walked in, he closed his eyes and turned around and walked out again. He said it was overload. But he still loved his wife and kids. And when he came back a little bit later, I think they swept up the popcorn somehow or other. But I'll never forget that. The big question in life, friends, and he was giving this sermon one day, the big question in life is not, and he mentioned some big, huge, real problems. He said, the big question is, what the heck's that cup doing in the sink? And for pity's sake, do not spill popcorn in the kitchen. That will freak me right out. So, as you ride against the wind that is life, there will always be a breeze. And if you're going to make progress, there will always be a headwind. And life does call upon you to endure. But the good news is success is guaranteed if we keep our eye on the final outcome of it all. If life is half full and becoming more full as we move through it, then we will not be distracted by the distractions of somebody who wants to distract us, to move us around, to get us confused, to get us focusing on things that at the end of the day really don't matter. Jesus summarized it at the Last Supper when he said simply to his disciples, last thing virtually he says before leaving, I've told you these things so that in me you may have peace. Peace. A settled, clear thought that I'm going somewhere for a reason, and it's going to work out. Peace. In this world, he agrees with Job, you will have trouble, but take heart, seize heart, grab encouragement where you find it. And what is the greatest encouragement of all? I've overcome the headwinds of this world. I have overcome the world. So, with gratitude and a sense of relief, thank God that, yes, I'm moving through life, and yeah, the adversary growls and there are distractions, but I can find stability and peace because I know I do have to move against the headwind. The very nature of life is I'm going to get wind in my face. That's why I wear goggles, that's why I wear a helmet, that's where I wear leathers, and that's where I rejoice. And a lot of people, you've seen them all summer on the highways, just honking along on their big hogs, enjoying life, despite the headwind. And this is what Jesus wants for each and every one of us. And I take that inspiration from the song. In fact, probably the best way to learn, to finish the sermon is ask Pastor Larry, look, there's a guitar. Wow. Perhaps you could share that insight and summarize the sermon in a couple of minutes, far better than I could in 25 or 30. God bless.
got to ride.